Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to another Glacial Geek Deep Thoughts Thin Coats with me, Phil, the Glacial Geek. Today, we are going to be talking about some of the surprises that I've found in going into 8th edition and some of the things that were rather predictable. So the surprises and the predictability of knowing 40K and then going into 8th edition, the changes that have come up, and kind of seeing how they've played off with each other. So that's what we're going to be talking about, and what I'm going to be working on hobby-wise is I'm going to continue to paint up some Primaris Marines. These are the Intercessors, or no, the Hell Blasters. So these were the Intercessors that I painted up previously. They came out pretty good. I'm pretty happy with how they came out. I mean, they're tabletop quality. They're not going to win me a Golden Demon, but I mean, that's what I like. I like them having there. So I've got those. I also have the 2 Lieutenants, which are super cool, and we'll see how they go. But I don't know if I'm going to get all the way done with everything, but we'll keep going with it and see how it goes. So what have been some of the major surprises that I've seen going into 8th edition? Big changes that I think have occurred, things that I just didn't really expect that kind of came up on me going into this. So I think the first thing I'd like to talk about is how good flyers are in this edition. You know, I've had a lot of luck with my Dark Talon. That's the Dark Angels one there with the Rift Cannon. It throws out a lot of DACA, and the fact that they can now start on the table, you don't have to roll for them to make sure that they come onto the table. They start on the table. You don't have to worry about that. It has been fantastic, especially for that one because it has hover ability. So you're not going to have to worry about going off the table because you can't do that anymore. If you go off the table, they're just dead. So now you got to make sure that you keep your Marines, keep your flyers on the table. Otherwise, they go off and they die on you. But just the fact that they can start on the board and they're going to be useful to you starting turn 1 really ups their strength. You know, I think that the fact that a lot of them have the hard to hit gives them that +1 to hit, or -1 for units to try to shoot at them. Makes a big difference. The fact that they can't be charged as easily, you have to have a fly unit that charges them. All of that, I think, really makes a big difference when it comes to this kind of when it comes to their usefulness now in the new edition. And I think it all ups their usefulness. You know, the fact that they start on the board, they start out fast, and they've got a lot of them have a lot of really strong armaments, and they have things to compensate for heavy weapons shooting. A lot of them have strafing run, and maybe this is just from my experience. Maybe it's just Dark Angels flyers are great, but yeah, the fact that they have like those, there's a lot of them have the ability to add 1 to their shooting to compensate for firing those heavy weapons makes them really, really, really useful. And the fact that now you don't have to go into hover mode, because there is not necessarily hover mode in a lot of them, to disembark units, then transporting them there becomes very nice. Because you just run them up there, the unit, you know, fly them up there the 40 inches, so now they're basically anywhere you want them to be on that table. And the next turn, that unit drops out of those flyers and ready to do what they need to do. You know, they're really going to be able to get to where they need to. And a lot of them have high number of wounds and toughness, so they're not going to die real quick. You know, I did have one game in a tournament I played this last weekend where my Dark Talon died turn 1 to orc shooting, but that's because basically he shot all of his weapons at it because he just didn't want it flying around on him. He knew that he was going to have some trouble with it if it got into his face with the Rift Cannon and whatnot. So he decided to focus fire all of his shooting basically on it and took it out, which ended up being pretty good for him. He ended up beating me. That was the only loss I had in that tournament. But it became super effective. Otherwise it was super effective in the other games when I got to shoot it. You know, they ended up taking a lot. They take a lot of aggro. Like they face a lot of shooting because people don't like them, and now the fact that they can hit them without having to snap fire makes them much more of a prime target for attacking. But to be honest, when I'm playing against flyers, I haven't sent a lot of things after them because there's usually other things on the board that I want to take out as well. And therefore, they're able to fly around. I just played a game against someone with a Barracuda, and that thing just flew around shooting me with some really strong weaponry, which worked out well for him, not as well for me. But yeah, I think they're able to deliver a lot of strong shots and a lot of DACA reliably across the table when sometimes your units have trouble getting over to those places. You know, now the fact that you can't just deep strike units right next to them, you can do it within 9 inches, which is still pretty close for most shooting. But it's changed the dynamic a lot on what you need to do to get some DACA into the other side of the table. I think flyers are going to be the way of the future for that. Getting them out there, being able to travel, 20 to 40 inches per turn, gets them anywhere they want to be, especially that first time when you can just place them on the board and face them in the direction you want them to go. And then, once it's your turn, 40 inches later, you're exactly where you wanted to be. No needing to roll to get them onto the table, no needing to worry about anything like that, which is pretty fantastic. So that's basically, I think that's one of the first big surprises, is how good I think flyers are going to be. I think they're going to be effective. I think that they're going to be strong, but I think there's also a lot of other scary units out there that they won't necessarily be the viewed as the primary threat, which I think is going to save them a lot on the table, because you're going to have them. People are going to be shooting your other units instead of them. So that means they're going to be strong. They're going to be allowed to just kind of fly around and do what they do. But if they do draw fire, then that's saving a lot of your other units as well, because the things that you're going to be shooting at a flyer are essentially the things that you're going to be shooting at any of your tanks, any of your heavy weaponry, because it's that high strength, high damage weaponry that you're going to want to use on a flyer. So if they're shooting it at your flyer, that means that they're not shooting it at other units that you have on the table, opening up a lot of it. They the fact that that they focus fired on my flyer a lot meant that in that list that I had, my las cannon predators were able to sit back and do what they did without harassment for a long time, because while he's focusing on that flyer, my las cannon predators are not getting shot off the board. So even for that simple fact, that if they do draw aggro, it means it's drawing attention away from your other strong units that you might have. If they don't draw aggro, then they're going to be flying around there shooting up the board as much as they want, which is pretty fantastic. Getting places that a lot of other units might have trouble getting to if they don't have some sort of deep strike rule. So yeah, I think that the flyers are going to be, I think you're going to see a lot more use of flyers in this edition, simply because of that, and the fact that you don't need to take anti-air. Actually, I feel like I think that's a benefit, coming into this edition, because what it means is that those units now don't have to worry about taking purely anti-air forces in order to handle any flyers that might come. You can shoot them with whatever else, so they're not going to cause people to get salty, which is always a bonus, especially if you're playing in a tournament, because people like to get salty at those. So yeah, so while not being OP, the fact that they're pretty strong, pretty powerful, and can do a lot of versatile things for you on the table, I think that flyers, you're going to see a lot more flyers in 8th edition than I really thought they were going to do. I never really thought about what they were going to change. I thought when they did institute the different rules that they came out with the what is it called? The death of the wings of death. I can't remember, the special flyer rules, and you can use them if you want in the advanced rules section of the rule book. But for most people that aren't going to use them, I think they're going to be pretty exciting to use, and I think you're going to see a lot of them on the table because of what they can do for you and what they can do for a list. So yeah, I know I'm surprised by that, because I saw flyers that did certain things, like Storm Ravens were pretty powerful in the last edition. They did a lot of damage and got to drop a lot of troops right in my face, and I never had access to it. But I think that now, flyers being what they are, and the fact that you can start them on the board, there's less worry about taking them and being stuck with them in reserves. The number of times that I faced opponents who had those flyers that were stuck in reserve until turn 4, it's frustrating and it's annoying, and it really deters you from taking them. So now that you don't have that deterrent anymore, I think you're going to see a lot more people bringing flyers, and I think they're going to be pretty effective, without being overpowered, with the fact that you can now shoot them with just with possibly -1, depending upon if the unit has that hard to hit rule. But at worst, a -1 means that you don't have to bring anti-air specific units. You get to just fight at them with your army, and it goes back to the whole anything can wound anything thing, which is, in my opinion, pretty fantastic. What else? I think I mean, maybe it's not surprising, but it's definitely something that was emphasized, is the power of multi-wound weapons. In this realm of the new edition, there's a lot of units that have a lot of wounds. My attack bikes, it turns out, have 4 wounds now. Regular bikes are 2 wounds. Terminators are 2 wounds. Primaris Marines are 2 wounds. There's a lot of things with multiple wounds that you can take out there. And the fact that now there are a bunch of weapons that do multiple wounds in the damage phase is pretty effective, because you look at a lot of those vehicles, you look at a lot of the monsters coming out there with, upwards of 20 something wounds, or even if you get up to a Stampa with 40 wounds, there's a lot of wounds that you have to go through. And if you have to get through them all with just 1 wound shots, it's going to take you forever, And I think that that's something that really got emphasized when I was bringing my las cannons, the fact that they could bring down, super heavies, the fact that they could bring down knights and tanks and dreadnoughts and whatever else really became very crucial for them to have that D6 wounds, because you've got those shots that go in there. They're not as effective against 1 wound models like the boys that I had to shoot them sometimes with at the orc side. Yeah, that's a little overkill, you know what I mean? But, when he had his Morkanot come up, I was able to shoot them with the las cannons, and it was super effective, And I think that's going to be, I think you're going to see a lot of emphasis on people's lists of bringing those high wound weapons, So you're going to see las cannons a lot. You're going to see things like that I think you're going to see, they're going to have a pretty big impact, I think, on the game, because of the fact that there's so many multi-wound models nowadays, now with 8th edition, that it becomes pretty crucial to be able to take out units that have multi-wounds without having to pour just a massive amounts of single wound shots. There's a bunch of weapons that have 2 wounds. Supercharged plasma do 2 wounds now, which is perfect for shooting at against Terminators. Yeah, if you do that, you get the chance of possibly killing yourself, which I have done already. But there's also a lot of buffs that you can get from different characters that let you reroll 1s, that let you reroll misses, that really lowers the probability of you overcharging yourself to death. If you do it smartly, if you do it correctly, I don't think it's going to be quite as much of a danger. And the fact that you've now doing 2 wounds makes them Terminator killers. They're going to be great because they've got the rend, the 8B of -3, which takes down that 2+ save down to their 5+ invul save. They've got doing 2 wounds if they fail that, so there's 2/3 of a chance of you killing a Terminator with a shot of plasma. And the fact that a lot of them are rapid fire means that you're able to put in a lot of shots down range that can then really take out a squad of Terminators, because Terminators nowadays have come back into effectiveness. I really feel like they're going to be a lot stronger. I think you're going to see a lot more of them. Raising them up to 2 wounds made all the difference, in my opinion, making them able to survive, because you don't quite die off because of that one bad roll of 1. You know what I mean? You get a better chance of keeping them alive, and I think because of that, you're going to see them more. And because you're going to see them more, you're going to need to counter them more. And I think multi-wound dealing weapons like plasma, overcharged plasma, are really going to be the way to handle that. So multi-wound weapons, I think, are going to be the new hotness. I think you're going to see a lot of people looking to take those because you can, I've seen people talking about conscript lists where you've got a whole bunch of lasgun shots. I think that can be effective. I think that you're going to see a lot of horde armies. I think the fact that I think horde armies are going to be a thing again. But at the same time, you need to. I think you're going to need to have some of those special weapons to handle the multi-wound models. Because if you're trying to shoot down a Land Raider, and he's got as many wounds as he's got, it's going to take you forever to try to take it down with those las cannons, you know. And he's just going to come up and charge you and really kind of hurt you. He's going to absorb a lot of the DACA, and he's going to be able to get up there and charge and lock you in. So yeah, I think you're going to want to have a bunch of things that can do multi-wounds to take down a lot of those big heavies that have got tons and tons of wounds now. So yeah, I think multi-wound weaponry is something that kind of surprised me. I never thought, you know, I know people are talking about like D6 for a las cannon, and I was like, wow, that's super cool, but I never thought about how kind of crucial it's going to be in the game today with all of these multi-wound and super multi-wound models that are going to be out there that you're going to be facing in tournaments or in any kind of match that you're going to want to handle. So having something that can put out that much damage for as much DACA as it does is going to be pretty. It's going to be pretty clutch, I think, in the game the way it's going to be played. Yeah. So what else? I guess assault. I know that a lot of people talk. You know, at the beginning, people were really skeptical about thinking that assault was going to make a resurgence. But honestly, I've seen tons and tons of first turn assaults where that was a rarity, a super rarity, back in 7th edition. And the fact is, if you're running in a close combat heavy army, you really need to get into combat as quick as possible. And now with 8th edition, it's possible to get into close combat first turn. And because of that, it makes them much more viable as a unit. You know, and a lot of the close combat specializing units are really going to do well because they've got the ability to get into combat, because the quicker you can get into combat, the less likely you are to get shot off the board before you can do something. You know, sure, there's things like fallback, with you know, which makes it doesn't mean that you're completely safe once you make it into combat like it used to be. Once you were locked in, you kind of were locked in. But at the same time, you don't have to worry about it because, you know, sure, you're gonna have to worry about if they fall back and the rest of his army decides to shoot you, but that's much better than back in the day when you were still crawling across the table before you got to get your swings in and getting shot off the table by the rest of his army. So now that you can get in quick and you can get in early, it's going to be able to do you're going to be able to do much better, because you'll at least get something in there and do some damage like you're supposed to do before you end up getting shot off the table. So, you know, if you're going to get shot off the table one way or the other, it's better to do it after you've gotten some hits in with your close combat units. Another thing, I think that something that surprised me, that the effectiveness is going to be the fly special rule. I think that the fact that there are a lot of units now, especially in the Tau, which don't do as great in close combat, and they don't get locked in anymore. They can just fly and fall back and be able to shoot you. It makes that army much more viable, makes that army a lot stronger, being able to do that, because you can't lock them into combat. And they can still actually do something instead of having to back out, wait a turn before they can do something. So I think that's surprisingly effective manner of balancing out, effective way to balance out the fact that close combat has become much easier to achieve and much more effective. I think the fact that fly, I believe, has really balanced that out so that there aren't armies that just get you know, wrecked because of it. I think that Tau would have had a hard time if they didn't make that fly rule and give it to a lot of their suits to allow them to fall back and still do something, because otherwise they would just be getting locked in combat, and there's not much that army can do beside it. They're not very assaulty. They're not very strong when it comes to those close combat attacks. They've got hitting on 5s in close combat with their suits, and yeah, they're strength 6, but you know, no AP. There's nothing that's going on there. They're not getting a whole lot of extra attacks, and as they start getting wounded, they start getting less and less attacks. So I think the fact that you have this kind of this method that allows them to still be a viable army really puts them up there as a strong army. And I've had a lot of trouble with Tau in 8th edition. They're pretty strong. They've got a lot of things that they can do. They've got a lot of high strength units and high strength weapons that are making they make a big impact on the game. And the fact that they can just pop out of combat makes them even more effective, to be honest. And not in a bad way. I think in a good way, because I think it would have been real easy to not have them able to back out like that, and it really would have hurt them. I think, you know, it would have really nerfed them hard, you know, if they couldn't fall out of combat and still do something. Otherwise, they would just spent their entire game just falling back, waiting until they got charged again and again and again. You know, because there are units that can get up there fast, like you know, Assault Marines. They can get up there. They can move 12 inches. You've got things like Gene Stealers, being able to Gene Stealer cult ambush, or even just move. They can move, you know, move 8 inches. Or they can move in advance, and still assault. So you're looking at a possible 8 inches plus 16, 14 inches plus 12 inches for the charge. That's a pretty big threat range, you know what I mean? And you know, and then they have the ability to cult ambush. If they happen to roll a 6, they can be placed 9 inches away. Then they can move normally. So they can move their 8 inches, puts them an inch away. And then you can also advance if you so desire. So if you got some guys that had to be farther back, or you just couldn't place them quite at 9 inches, you've got the ability to advance with them. So that's, you know, you're putting them supposedly more than 9 inches away, and you can move possibly 14 inches before you get to before you then get to charge. That's pretty brutal, you know. And Gene Stealers in your face turn 1 because of that really makes a big difference. Which kind of reminds me of another thing that surprised me, is how they've dealt with reserves. You know, the fact that now not everything can be put in reserves. I think that's interesting. You know, back in the day, you could put literally anything you wanted, and null deploy was a thing, and they've canceled out null deploy. But they've also made it so that it's hard for a lot of armies and a lot of units to put things in reserve, because not everything has the ability to deep strike, or have the ability to cult ambush, or hide, or drop down from a manta. You know, there are certain armies that have more access to that, which I think represents them in the fluff much better. So being able to do that, I think, has been really interesting. And the fact that you can start coming in turn 1 without worrying about it really adds to that whole, really changes that whole dynamic the way it used to be, where you would be sitting in reserves with a whole bunch of your units that you didn't know if they were coming in or not until turn 4. You know, and sitting there waiting for your units to come in turn 4 got frustrating. You know, it got very annoying. And the fact that even if you're playing someone, you don't want them to have those units, but, you know, if you win and most of his army wasn't able to come in from reserves, you kind of only beat an underpriced, underpointed list, you know? But it took away a lot of those things, and it took away a lot of, I think it added a lot of tactical thought to the system now, that you can plan to have them coming in turn 1, or plan to have them coming in later on, depending upon what you want to do with them. You can plan for when you want them in. And I think that makes a big difference. And I think that makes, you know, makes it a lot of fun, the fact that you can just do this now and get your units where you want them to be, when you want them to be there, so they can do something. You know what I mean? Maybe you want to hold them back until turn 2, so that you can actually have some time to get your ground units up into someone's face to do some more distracting, so that this assaulty squad can drop down and do their thing without being harassed with shots. You know, or maybe you just want to bring everything in turn 1. That's what I've been doing. You know, everything that I've got in reserves, everything I've got in deep strike, everything I've got in cult ambush, turn 1. That's what I bring them in, because I want them in there. I want them on the table doing what they do as soon as possible. And I think that makes a big difference, being able to do that. Having that kind of tactical decision-making really makes it far more effective to hold things in reserve, because you can plan on things, like I said. So I think that's a big surprise, how different and effective it's made holding things in reserve. The fact that you can now plan for it to come in whenever you want it to come in, honestly makes it far more likely that I'll put things in reserve. Because if I had a roll for it, that really made me upset. You know, I ran a list, my competitive list at the end of 7th was a Skyhammer Annihilation Force and a Ravenwing Strike Force. And I used to null deploy, and the only reason I would null deploy and I would have those things is because I knew that my Skyhammer was coming in turn 1, and I knew that my Ravenwing were coming in turn 2. It was guaranteed. That's the only reason I put all of those things in reserve. Before I had access to those things, I was very reticent about putting anything in reserve, because I hated doing reserve rolls. Reserve rolls I inevitably would roll 2s and 1s for days, and I never would get them in, and it made it very frustrating. So the fact that I was able to plan for when they were coming in, and I could go into it with a game plan, made it far more effective, made it far more likely that I wanted to do it. So I think doing that with everything in reserves now in 8th edition makes that far more even, make it far more equal, make it balances out a bit more, so that ability isn't just reserved for, you know, Space Marines. The fact that, you know, it used to be that only drop pods you could guarantee, or a few formations that mostly were just formations of Dark Angels, or not Dark Angels, of Space Marines, including Dark Angels, that would guarantee you be coming in on certain turns. So the fact that now everyone can do that, I think is a big boon. Big boon to the game, because now it's become another avenue of tactical decision making. You know, and I think that's the biggest benefit I think that this edition so far has done, is it's really opened up a lot of the tactical decision making in game, or even planning for the game. You know what I mean? It used to be that you would be tactically sound in picking your list, and then the list played out the way the list does. Nowadays, I think lists are going to be much more diverse. I've talked about this before, that having the ability to handle all sorts of lists is going to be far more important in tournaments. I learned that my list did not have enough of a widespread to handle fast and numerous hordes. So the fact that I learned that lesson in the tournament means that I'm going to be adjusting my list and making things different so that I can do the things that I had trouble with the next time I play. But yeah, I think that it just adds that tactical level of understanding when you're putting things into reserves, when you're putting things into deep strikes, so that you know when they're going to be coming in, so you can plan on them being there, and you don't have to sit there hoping. You know, sitting there hoping that they're going to come in, that's not tactics. That's you know, that's just adding a level of luck to the situation. And I think that when you have these games, you want to have it so that the best so that the best general wins. You know, not the one who had the best rolls for reserve. You want to have the one who was able to marshal his forces best, you know, and get in there and wreck face. So yeah, I think that having the reserve system the way they've done is a big surprise, and it's a good surprise. And that's most of the things, that most of these different surprises have not been disappointments. They've been happy surprises. You know, things that I've been very that I enjoyed, that I think are going to be super good for the game, super good for competition, super good for the enjoyment. You know, and that's one of my biggest takeaways from 8th, is that it's a far more enjoyable system than 7th was. 7th had a lot of frustrations, a lot of things that people could argue about, people had disagreements over. You know, and there's always going to be rules differences, but the fact that 8th edition now has come out and basically they're saying, you know, we're going to be responsive to that. We're going to be able to change things the way they've got the point system worked out. They're able to rebalance units and rebalance weapons, so that if suddenly they see that everyone's taking, you know, the one type of weapon because it's just super OP and why not take it because it's so cheap, they can rebalance it and add a couple more points to it so that it becomes more of a decision. Now it's like, well, you know, yeah, it was kind of nice, but I don't know if it's worth an additional 10 points or additional 5 points. Or hopefully what they get to is the point that you see that and you go, yeah, I'll pay the extra 5 points. It balances it out, makes it a little bit, you know, I have to figure out other things to change in my list so that they can take them. But at the same time, I'm able to make that decision. And if they can make it so that you still want to take it at those points, you know, anytime you have like auto includes or auto disincludes, I think it limits a lot of what you can do in a lot of what can happen in an army. And I think that's not beneficial to the gaming community or beneficial to any of us, really. I think the more options you have, the more versatility you can have in an army and a list, I think the better. And I think the more that you have of that, the more you're going to see people enjoying the game. You know, if they can bring what they want to bring and still remain at least somewhat competitive, you know, there are always going to be units that are better than others. And there are going to be units that you're going to want to bring because of how they perform for you and how they perform with your tactics. But at the same time, it used to be, you know, I remember there was a time as a Dark Angel when people were like, the only thing you need to bring is Ravenwing. That's it. That's all that was viable in 7th edition at the end, is what people were talking about. It's like some people, diehards, were still trying to bring their Terminators, but, you know, to be honest, Terminators were, yeah, they were tough. They were tough to work with in 7th edition and work and make them effective. I think it was a lot easier to just throw up those 2+ rerollable Jinx saves with a Dark Shroud, and just run a whole bunch of Black Knights and run a whole bunch of Ravenwing spam. And I think it got boring. You know, the fact that I tried to bring a whole bunch of different lists and tried to figure out different combinations that would work well. And I mean, there's the reason that my only Dark Angel units I was bringing to competitive games were my Ravenwing. Says something, you know, and this is coming from a guy who likes to vary up his list. I mean, if you watch my battle reports, they're very different. You know, from day to day, they can change. You know what I mean? And you know, I'm limited to how many units that I currently have because I'm still just, you know, there's only so much money that I can spend and so much time that I have to build and paint things. But at the same time, even with that, I like to experiment and bring out new lists and different lists, and you know, but I've got no problem doing that in a bat rep where I don't really care if I win or not, because if I lose, it makes a whole lot of funny woo sound, funny fill faces, and if I win, I get to make a whole lot of woos, and either which way, it's going to be good content. You know what I mean? And that's kind of what I look to make when I make battle reports and when I make lists for battle reports. Is this going to be interesting to watch, and are people going to want to watch it? Not is this going to win? You know. But when I would go into a situation where I was like, is this going to win? I mean, my Terminators had to stay home. That's just plain and simple. Even my Green Wing was not as effective as vanilla Space Marines, which is why I would run my Green Wing as Ultramarines in tournaments, so that I could bring the Skyhammer, because it was just added a level of predictability and how it was gonna handle. You know what I mean? And that's what it came down to. Is people made lists based upon what the formations and what their list could give them. You know what I mean? And I think now you're looking at people that are making lists because they think they're going to be effective, or they don't think they're going to be effective, and they'll avoid it. Either which way, it does come down to much more openness in what you can bring, and that's, I guess, not a surprise. I think we all kind of were hoping for that, but it's nice to see that that's become the reality. Because at the tournament I was playing, you know, we had a wide variety of different armies that did well. You know, the top two were Admech and Astra Militarum, you know, and there was orcs that were performing really well as well. And I think just the fact that they were doing as well as they were doing really made things super effective. And I think it made it fun, and I think it made it interesting. The fact that all these different armies, all these different lists were able to come to the same tournament and perform and hold up on the same level. You know what I mean? And I think there was a lot of lessons learned. You know, I had a friend who brought a really, looked like it was going to be a really brutal Grey Knights army, Grey Knights list, and it was really brutal, but he ran up into things that just he wasn't able to handle, you know, and things that were unexpected. And I think you're going to see a lot of that going forward, especially in the more competitive scene. I think you're going to see the better players are still going to perform well, but I think you're going to see a wide variety of lists and a wide variety of units being brought. You know what I mean? I think if you see people bringing Eldar, you're not just going to see bike spam. You know what I mean? I don't think that's going to be as effective in this new edition as it was in the previous edition. You know, when you see someone bringing Dark Angels, you're not going to just see Ravenwing spam. You know what I mean? I think there's a lot of things that are super effective. My Predator, Last Cannon Predators did really well, and I think that they're going to continue to do really well in my list, because that's what I'm going to want to bring. But yeah, so that seeing that come is not I guess not so much a surprise as it's just nice to see that actually came to fruition. Because there was a lot of people that, like, you know, that were doubting the fact whether or not that was actually going to become a thing. But in my experience so far, it really has been. You know, even in the games that I've played in my battle reports, there's been a lot of parity between the different armies. You know, my friend who has the Iron Hands, he creamed me in that battle report that I played, and then we played. That was Mob Rules 10. He creamed me in the battle report that we played, but we were also able to we met each other in the tournament, and my new list that did much better against him. You know, I actually won that game pretty handily. There was a lot of rolls that went weird, like he 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 perils with double sixes on his librarian after his librarian was already hurt, only had 2 wounds left. He double sixed looking to get off smite. He was like, well, I'm going to spend a command point to reroll that because I don't feel like having my librarian die on me at this point. So he re-rolled the 1-6 and rolled it back into a 6. So he rolled it, and sure enough, did D3 wounds, did 2. His Psyker died, and in so doing, supplied a whole bunch of other mortal wounds to all his other units that were circled up around him, and it was pretty brutal to see that happen. I'm used to seeing command points where I roll 1s back into 1s, but seeing the roll of a 6 back into a 6 was that was a new experience, and just as brutal, and just as unwanted. When you've got those things that it's like only one result out of this reroll is what I don't want, and sure enough, that's the one that comes up. I had that. I had a Vindicare Assassin that had a Troop Master from the Harlequins in his sights. Last shot of the game, rolls, got a hit, 2 to wound, rolled a 1. Used my command point, rolled another 1. And if I had made that shot, he probably would have been dead because it ignores invul saves, and it was -3 to the armor save, and he just wouldn't have had a save, and it does D3 wounds, so at least 1, he would have been dead. And I ended up winning that battle anyway, but I would have been upped from a minor to a major victory. But yeah, another thing that's kind of surprised me is how important command points are. I know, like, at first when they talked about, it's like, oh, you get to re-roll a die with the command point or interrupt combat with the 2 command points. I was like, all right, well, whatever, we'll see. It might make for a few interesting situations, but it's become like a major component of the game is marshaling your command points effectively so you don't run out of them towards the end of the game when you really need them in those clutch situations. You can't just re-roll the first thing that comes up. You got to think about what's going to happen the rest of the turn, the rest of the phase, and the rest of the game. Trying to figure out which of those things is going to do a better job for you. But yeah, that surprised me, honestly, how effective and how important command points are in the new game. What else? I think another thing that's really surprised me is how well I feel like it's balanced between the effectiveness of shooting and the effectiveness of assault. Because it would have been a real easy time to just completely flip things on its head and make shooty armies about as effective as assaulty armies were in 7th edition, and just make it so you can't fire Overwatch, just make shooting more difficult and make assault just super easy. But I feel like they've done a fantastic job in this new edition of balancing out the effectiveness of assault-heavy armies and the effectiveness of shooty armies. So I think Tower's still just as effective, even though they're predominantly shooty. I think that you're going to see assault squads are going to be way more effective than they were in 7th edition now. I think you're going to see things that it's just going to be very interesting to see how they've balanced out the assault versus shooty to the fact that you can take either which one and still be just as effective in the battle, which is the way you want it to be. You want it to have that, where you can have those choices and they both serve the role that they're supposed to be serving and do the job that they're supposed to be doing. So to be able to see that, I think it's a surprise, to be honest. I heard what was going to happen, and I was like, okay, well, we'll see what happens. I didn't have my hopes high about the fact that they were going to be able to balance that out as well as they did, but they did, and I think that's pretty fantastic. It makes it very open, makes it very accessible for a lot of people who want to run different armies and different variations on those armies, and they make it very interesting. Also, I never thought about, I've been surprised at the effectiveness of charging, of vehicles making charges. Most of them have a lot of wounds, and they've got a relatively high toughness compared to your regular troops. And I think the fact that what they're good at is trying to absorb that Overwatch. I know you can still Overwatch if they don't make the charge, but if they charge first and make that charge, they've locked in that unit, and no one else is going to be able to Overwatch. They're not going to be able to Overwatch your other unit that's now running in and charging. That's more of a close combat specialist, And hopefully you kind of, by doing that kind of activity there, you kind of force your opponent to then fall back with their units out of combat on their turn, leaving you open to do what a tank does best, which is shoot you in the face on your turn. You know what I mean? Because they're not going to, if you get both of those units in, they're not going to focus their close combat attacks on your vehicle unless they happen to be very good at taking out vehicles. Then they might, and then you might want to consider not charging in with your vehicle. But I think that the fact that it opens up a lot of tactical decisions there when you're coming in with transport. So if I've got a bunch of Terminators inside of my Land Raider and I run them up the board and then I disembark my Terminators and I charge in with my Land Raider before charging to my Terminators, then at that point my Land Raider gets to soak up a lot of those wounds. He's got the assault launchers, which do mortal wounds to units that he finishes charges near, and it helps to keep those Terminators fresh and ready to go once they get into combat. So it's another level of tactics. I think that vehicles and transports kind of did, there wasn't a lot of emphasis on them once they actually transported the unit. I think now there's a lot more emphasis on them being able to block line of fire for Overwatch or get in the charge and completely just lock up Overwatch against your units that are assaulting. And I think it becomes a much more effective situation that you get to run with. So yeah, that's a lot of, I think that's something that surprised me, and I think it's something that I'm very excited about having. So yeah, so that's what that is. Another thing that I've been very surprised with is how they've handled the move from with flamers, flame template weapons and blast weapons, making them with the random number of shots, so the D6 or the D3 or whatever, or 3D6 if you're Yavara, and I think that's pretty effective. And I think it was a good way to handle the situation, so that flamers became a bit more reliable because you don't have to roll to hit, you don't have to worry about cover. Oh, you do have to worry about cover, but you don't have to worry about a lot of things. I think it's going to be very effective. I think flamers became far more effective against lower count units now, which is good, because there was a number of times that you're sitting there and you're looking at a one-man unit and you're like, well, my flamer gets one hit on them. And it's like, now he's got D6 hits, just as he would have if they had a 10-man squad. And it also helps now that you don't have to worry about placing your units exactly 2 inches apart and spending all that time doing that. That became frustrating. It became annoying, but it's something that you had to do if you wanted to be competitive and faced a lot of flamers or faced a lot of templates. And they took that out of the game and made it a far more streamlined experience because of that. And I'm surprised at how effective their choices were. I know I get called out sometimes. I'm forgetting that I have to roll the random number of shots sometimes, and that's true, but I knew that rule. That's just me forgetting things. It's me having a hard time with that versus it being a bad rule. You know what I mean? So I'm excited to see how they going forward with all of that. I think it's going to be strong. It's going to be fun and going to be interesting. I also think that it's going to be interesting to see how they keep handling, how they're going to adjust things and change things, because I've already heard some people complain about certain things, and it'll be interesting to see if they take that into consideration, or they just go, that's just the way you have to deal with them now in this new edition. That's what you got to think about with this new edition. So it should be interesting to see how that all kind of goes along. But yeah, those are just this is a few of the things. I've been super excited playing the game and playing with the way things have changed. I think it's going to be a lot of fun going forward. I think there's going to be a lot of I think we're in a pretty interesting time with 40K. I think this is a real renewal of the system. You know what I mean? And I know people have put have used the analogy, talk about that 7th edition was basically, 3rd edition just pieced together over another couple of editions and taped together and glued back together and tried to be fixed. And, this is a whole new experience. 8th edition is a whole new game, but still contains a lot of, I say all of the tactical, the tactical decisions and the tactical gameplay that you have going on with it. And I think it's been a very interesting experience playing with it so far. And it makes me very excited going forward with what they're going to do. I feel the utmost confidence in what they're doing with the new system, and I have the utmost confidence in how they're handling the way they're going to treat the new system, you know, with the fact that they're open to having FAQs a lot more often and quickly. It took a long time to get any FAQs when it came to 7th edition, so I'm glad to see that they basically already put one out. And it wasn't really an FAQ, it was more like a thought process from the, it was a thought piece basically and process from the writers, how they envisioned certain things going when they made the rules. And going forward, they said they're going to have FAQs more often, and they're going to have adjustments to the game, and they're going to have updates to the game, so that you don't have to wait 3 years for a whole new system to come out. They're going to do basically what they've done with the General's Handbook. That they're going to have a new thing. They're going to kind of adjust the rules and have a fresh new take on it every year or so that they can fix any of the problems that arise. Especially once we start getting into far more. I know we had the first GT, the Boise Cup. So I think once you get a lot more GTs under their belts, when they see a lot more of what the competitive scene's doing, and when they see how when a lot more games start getting played, I think you're going to see them responding to the information that comes out of those things, and that's exciting. The fact that Games Workshop is so responsive and so interested in making sure that this game works, which is awesome. You know, it's invigorating to know that they're as much behind this and making sure it works as we are dedicated to it. So yeah, that's fun. I think it's exciting. I think it's something we have to look forward to. And I think my biggest, surprise when it comes to 8th edition is how universally, or how positive the community has been about 8th edition. You know, this is a community, to be honest, there's a lot of times when our community can get very salty, can get very upset, and can get very childish about things. And I think so far with 8th edition, I see far less salt. I see far less people being upset with it than they have been in previous times. Like with 7th edition, I think you see people are far more are enjoying the system more. You see people coming back to the system that they hadn't done in a couple editions. You see new people join in because they think it's a good time to jump in with a new system, and I think that's does nothing but positive things for us in our community, and I'm very excited about that. And to be honest, I'm a bit surprised because there are a couple people on my comments who just really were not on board with the 8th edition hype train. And I think a lot of the worries that people had, a lot of the concerns that people had, didn't pan out. You know what I mean? And I think that that in general and all in all, people have been very happy with how 8th edition has gone. Yeah. So, all right. So I got my first layer of green on. I probably have to go in and do another one before I move on to any colors. But so far so good. I think these models are just looking super, super awesome. And I'm very excited for them. I think the Primaris Marines look awesome. Have you seen the new Reaver models? Those things look super sweet. The Not Scout Primaris. Yeah, I think they're pretty awesome. I think they're going to be fun. And honestly, the reason I've got Primaris Marines isn't because I think they're super special and effective. Honestly, I think they're, that your point for point, your regular Marines are probably more effective than them. But especially with, like I said, the number of multi-wound shots that you can take that take out a Primaris Marine as well as easy as it takes out a regular Space Marine. But they look cool. And I think that's half of the reason I collect an army is because it looks cool. And I think the Primaris Marines are succeed in that. And they didn't make them OP, so they didn't make them to the fact that everyone's going to want to run them and everyone has to run them if they want to be competitive. No, I think the regular Marines are in many ways way more effective, cost-effective when you're building a list than the Primaris Marines. I mean, the Intercessors, not the Intercessors, the Inceptors, those guys are like 45 points base each. Plus, I think it's like 15 points for their Assault Bolters each. So you're looking at 75 points for a model, and you have to run them in sets of 3. That's a lot, that's a lot. My Black Knights are 50 points each, and they're 2 wounds, and they've got Plasma Talons and Corvus Hammers. They don't just have essentially heavy bolters in their hands, which can be effective, but I don't think it's OP. You know what I mean? I think they've pointed them out well. I think they've made it so that they're a viable choice, but not a need to do choice. I don't think they're trying to replace the Space Marines with them simply because they made them on par with what Space Marines do, point for point. So, yeah. So I'm collecting them because they look cool, and I think they look awesome, and I think they look great in a mixed unit out there. Like there's these big hulking behemoths running out there as well with their regular brothers. I think it makes it for a cool cinematic effect, and that's what I do with them. So I'll be definitely getting those Reavers, not because I think they're going to be the next big thing, but just because I think they look super cool. So yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed this. Those are just a few of my thoughts. I've got many, many others, but you know, those are the key ones, honestly. And I think that I've just really enjoyed 8th edition so far, and I'm very excited for 8th edition going forward. My first tournament experience with it was fantastic. It was fun. There were a lot of people there. We had 25 people show up at a local game. You know what I mean? I think you need that much to be a GT. And there was, you know, this was just a local monthly game that we had. And there were 25 people that showed up, and it was fun as hell. A lot of people having fun. There was, you know, there was some salt, but you're always going to have some salt. But I think far less salt than there had been in our 7th edition tournaments. So yeah, I think it was a rousing success, and I'm excited about it going forward. So, but let me know how you guys have responded. What surprised you the most in 8th edition? Let me know down in the comments. Let me know what you wanted more. Maybe there's stuff that you wanted more. I think a lot of the people that are disappointed with their armies, honestly, they haven't tried them enough on the table. And you also have to understand that these are not the same. This isn't the same game. You know, it's a very different system. It's a very different edition. And I think you need to start to learn how to play your army, its strengths and its weaknesses within the realm of this new system before you start making judgments of whether they've been, you know, nerfed or not. I've heard people say that, you know, Necrons are nerfed. Heard people say that Tau are nerfed, that Eldar are nerfed. Maybe compared to some of the formations they had in 7th edition, but maybe it's not the nerf. Maybe they just made them, you know, instead of overpowered, they're now powered. You know what I mean? I think they're on equal grounds, and I think people were used to bringing a certain list with their Eldar that would just trounce everyone else's list. And you can't do that now in this edition, and I think that's a benefit for the game. It may not be a benefit for that one Eldar player who just had that one list that they wanted to bring to every single game and just enjoyed trouncing people. I think the fact that they're now going to have to think about it is going to be difficult. And it's going to take some getting used to. And I think it's going to be well worth getting used to, though. I think it's been a lot of fun, and I think it's going to be a lot of fun. So let me know what you think, what your experience has been, what you've been most surprised about, what you're most disappointed with, anything. Just let me know, and we'll continue the conversation about this, because I really do like to hear what you guys have to say. So, yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed it. I have been Phil, the Glacial Geek, as always. And until next time, have fun.